I don't think I ever really forgot that face, the man in the window. His eyes glowed, not like anything human, and the bald curve of his head stood out against the pale blue sky just before dawn. For years I tried to convince myself it was just a nightmare, the kind kids invent after sneaking a scary movie or overhearing adults whisper about things they shouldn't. But the older I got, the more it lingered in a way that didn't feel imagined. It felt planted, real. I must have been 4, maybe 5. My twin brother Eli and I shared a bunk bed in the last room at the end of a narrow hallway in our little house on Willow Court, a quiet street in the small Georgia town of Shadewood. Across from us, our older sister Hannah had her own room. She was about 9 or 10 then, already sliding into that mom-like role older siblings sometimes take when parents are stretched thin. Our dad, Mark, split his time between the county police department and a lumber supply warehouse. Mom, Carrie, juggled PTA meetings, choir practice, and long drives to get Eli and me to speech therapy nearly an hour away. That night wasn't supposed to be special. I don't remember the details. Probably school, maybe chicken nuggets for lunch, cartoons before bed, just ordinary things. What I do remember, what I'll never shake, is the dream. It wasn't long. I was curled up in the bottom bunk, Eli snoring softly above me. Outside, the sky burned a deep red. Not the red of fire, but that murky, uneasy glow you sometimes see before sunrise. And standing just beyond the glass of our bedroom window was a man. Bald, skin pale like wax, eyes glowing the cold blue of a TV left on in the dark. He didn't knock. He didn't speak. He just stared. I couldn't move. My mouth opened, but nothing came out. And then suddenly I screamed, one long, blood-curdling sound that jolted me awake or maybe back into reality. Then it was gone. I remember Mom rushing in, scooping me up as I shook like my body wasn't mine anymore. She smelled like laundry detergent and coffee. Her arms were warm, but all I could think was, where's Dad? Why isn't he coming? That was it. That was all. For years I told myself it was nothing more than childhood fear. A bad dream. Fast forward 25 years. It's May, and I'm standing on a balcony in Cartagena, Colombia. My dad's in the ICU at San Vicente Medical, barely clinging to life. He'd been living down here with his second wife for years, while the rest of us, me, Eli, and Hannah, stayed in the States. When the call came, we dropped everything and flew down. That night, the 3 of us sat on the rooftop of a cheap hotel 5 minutes from the hospital, siblings bound by grief, bone-deep exhaustion, and the strange silence that hangs over family emergencies. We cracked open a few beers, hoping they'd unknot the weight in our chests. Somehow the topic of dreams came up. Maybe because none of us had been sleeping. I had this nightmare once when I was little, I said, leaning back against the rickety chair. And I told them, the red sky, the man, those eyes. I even laughed a little at the end. Guess I scared myself half to death. Hannah didn't laugh. She just stared at me, face gone slack, her beer frozen halfway to her lips. You don't remember? She asked quietly. What? I frowned. Her voice changed, sharper, firmer. That wasn't a dream. That really happened. She set the bottle down, and her hands didn't shake. Her voice didn't waver. Hannah told us everything. It had been happening for days. A man in a dark green truck kept showing up, trailing her when she rode home from school. At first she thought it was coincidence, just a guy who happened to take the same road. But after the 3rd or 4th time, she knew better. He had this face, she said, staring past us like she could still see it. The kind you don't forget. Like someone smiling too wide, too still. Our neighborhood sat against an old industrial lot, abandoned tracks, rusting machinery, and dense woods parents warned us to avoid. The man would park his truck there and watch. Hannah saw him from her window one night standing just beyond the trees, waiting. And then came that night. She'd been reading under the covers long after she was supposed to be asleep, when she looked up and saw him, watching. The room across the hall from ours had a wide window that never really locked right. Around midnight, Hannah said she heard it. First a faint jiggle, then the push, a slow sliding sound like metal teeth grinding. She sat up, her book slipping from her hands, and there he was, bald, skin pale as candle wax, and those same electric blue eyes I thought I'd only seen in a nightmare. She screamed so loud it could have woken the whole block. Dad burst in, baton already in his hand, pulling it from the top drawer of the dresser. He charged at the window just as the man was easing it open. There was a crack. Hannah swore she heard bones snap, but the stranger slipped back into the night like smoke. Only he wasn't gone. A minute later, he was at our window. Mine and Eli's. He rattled the frame, but ours was locked. Thank God. The scream I let out wasn't from a dream. It was real, torn straight out of my chest until my throat burned raw. Mom clutched Eli and me, sobbing, rocking us like we were babies. Dad sprinted out the back door, vanishing into the dark with his baton in hand. But the man melted into the woods and was gone. He never came back. At least that's what we told ourselves. We never spoke of it again. Not until that night on the balcony in Columbia. I sat frozen, half-empty beer bottle clenched so tight it hurt. "Why didn't anyone ever tell me?" I asked, voice low, shaky. Hannah shrugged, eyes tired. "You were a kid. Mom thought you were too young. You screamed so hard you didn't remember what happened after." "What did the cops do?" "They drove around. That was it. No arrest, no follow-up." Eli, who hadn't said a word all evening, finally spoke. Voice quiet, almost childlike. "I think I remember something. Red. A red sky. And Mom crying." None of us said anything after that. Silence wrapped around us, heavy as stone. 2 days later, Dad died. The grief hit like a landslide. Fast, suffocating, impossible to outrun. There were funeral arrangements, endless phone calls, embassy paperwork. But at night, when the world went still, I couldn't sleep. The nightmare was back. Not exactly the same, but close enough. Always the man, always watching. When I flew home, I couldn't let it rest. I dug through old newspaper archives, combed police reports, even tracked down a retired Shadewood officer under the pretense of researching local crime from the 90s. At first, nothing. Then I found it. A police report dated 3 weeks after our break-in. A girl from our elementary school had gone missing. She was 12, found 2 days later, alive, but shaken so badly she could barely speak. She told police a bald man tried to drag her into his truck near the same industrial park. She bit his arm and bolted into traffic. She got away. Her description matched ours exactly. I found her. She goes by Morgan Sharp now, lives in Kansas, teaches 4th grade. I sent an email I didn't expect her to answer, but she did. Her reply was short, but enough to chill me. She remembered. She still has nightmares, and she wrote one line I can't erase from my head. "I know what he looked like because I saw his eyes. They weren't human. Like 2 screens glowing in the dark. You saw him too, didn't you?" I did, and I think he saw me first. Last month I drove back to Shadewood. The house still stands. Different paint, same layout. The trees out front are taller, the fence sagging. The industrial park is gone now, bulldozed into bland rows of condos. But the woods remain, thick, endless, dark. I stood at the edge, staring in, and I swear something stared back. Not a man, not anymore. Something that once wore human skin. Something that still waits at windows, patient, watching, hoping children scream themselves into forgetting. I've scoured every record I could. News sites, databases, police archives. Nothing. No arrest, no sketch, no photograph. It's like he was never there. But sometimes I catch it. A faint glow reflected on a screen, in the dark glass of a microwave at 2 a.m., that same eerie blue. And sometimes when I close my eyes, I see him again. The silhouette. bald, waiting. And I wonder, did he ever leave? Or is he still out there searching for another window, another child, another scream loud enough to erase the truth? I didn't have much of a safety net back then. This was about 6 years ago when I was in my early 20s, young enough to think life would somehow sort itself out just because it needed to. I'd just moved to Larchwood, not far from the town where I grew up, but far enough that I didn't know a single familiar face nearby. The original plan had been to move in with my boyfriend, but that went up in flames when I caught him cheating 2 weeks before our lease was supposed to begin. Suddenly I was stranded. No apartment, not nearly enough money to get one alone, and no clue what to do next. That's when the roommate scramble started. Funny how quickly desperation can bury caution. I ended up in a creaky old house with 3 guys I barely knew. 2 were complete strangers, and the third, Ryan, I'd only met once at a party through a mutual friend. He had struck me as decent enough. Quiet, nerdy, polite in a slightly awkward way. He worked night shifts at a UPS warehouse, which meant we'd rarely bump into each other. The other 2 were Josh and Derek, friends who had just moved from out of state. When we all met in the house, nothing about them set off alarms. Josh was chatty, maybe too chatty. Derek barely spoke, more of a blank slate than anything else. But silence, I would later learn, can be its own warning. Sometimes it's not the loud ones you need to worry about. The house was a sagging 2-story in a sketchier part of Larchwood. Not the worst place, but not the sort of neighborhood where you'd feel comfortable leaving a window open at night. The upstairs, where Ryan and I lived, was like its own little apartment. 2 small bedrooms, a worn-out living room, a narrow kitchen with peeling linoleum. The stairs creaked whenever someone touched them. Josh and Derek had taken the downstairs, which was still cluttered with half-unpacked boxes. They owned a ridiculous amount of stuff. Derek was into music production and had thousands of dollars worth of sound equipment. Josh had 3 TVs, a custom PC, a stack of consoles. I remember staring at it all and wondering how 2 guys with so much money tied up in electronics had chosen a dumpy house with a cracked porch and a front door that didn't always latch. I'd been uneasy since day one. I've always been cautious, maybe overly so. I lock my bedroom door even when I'm the only one home. I check every window before I sleep. My mom used to joke I was born scared, but it's not fear exactly, it's instinct. And that instinct started screaming at me just a few days after I moved in. It was a Tuesday. I only remember because I'd planned to visit a friend in the next city over, but the train got canceled, so I decided to stay in. Honestly, I was glad for the excuse to rest. Ryan had already left for his shift. Josh and Derek were supposed to be out all afternoon, moving the last of their stuff. The house was quiet. I cooked some pasta, half-watched something forgettable on Netflix, then carried my plate upstairs. As always, I locked my bedroom door behind me. With my headphones on, I started sorting through work emails. Maybe 20 minutes later, the sound of the front door opening drifted up from downstairs. Not unusual. Maybe they were back earlier than expected. But the noises that followed weren't normal. Cupboards banging open, heavy footsteps, furniture scraping across the floor. Not the casual sounds of someone coming home. More like someone tearing the place apart. I yanked off my headphones, holding my breath. Another thud. A crash. I tiptoed to my bedroom door, heart pounding so loud I was sure it would give me away. Then I heard it. The stairs. Slow, deliberate footsteps climbing one at a time. Not rushed, not careless, just steady. I reached for my phone with shaking hands. 1 step, 2. My thumb fumbled over the screen as I dialed 911. 3 steps, 4. Closer. The dispatcher's voice had barely begun her greeting when I whispered, "Someone's in the house. I don't think they know I'm here. I'm upstairs, bedroom door's locked. Please send someone, please." The words were still leaving my mouth when the doorknob to my room turned. Just a tiny rattle, not violent, but enough to turn my blood into ice. "Are you still there?" the dispatcher asked. I crouched beside my bed, Phone pressed so hard to my ear it felt like the plastic was cutting into my skin. "Yes, yes, I'm here," I whispered. "Police are on the way. Stay quiet." "Can you describe the person?" the dispatcher asked. "I didn't see them," I breathed. "I thought my roommates were gone. I don't think anyone knew I'd be home." The doorknob stopped turning. For a fleeting second, I let myself believe they'd gone. But then came another sound, a faint dragging like fingertips brushing along the wall outside my room. That small noise rooted me in place. I don't remember much about the next 2 minutes, only that they stretched into what felt like hours. My body refused to move. My brain refused to think. I was trapped inside my own skin, straining to hear anything beyond the thundering of my heartbeat. Then, sirens. The relief nearly buckled me. The police arrived in under 4 minutes, boots pounding through the house. I stayed frozen until I heard one of them shout, "Clear!" Only then did I unlock my door, though my hands shook so violently that my phone slipped from my grip and clattered across the floor. Downstairs looked like a battlefield. Drawers ripped out, dishes smashed, couch cushions gutted. Derek's expensive speakers were in pieces. Josh's PC tower cracked open like a broken safe. One of the TVs lay shattered face down, glass scattered like teeth across the floor. The back door had been pried open, splintered wood around the frame, proof they hadn't even come through the front. They had crept in from the yard, assuming the house was empty while I sat upstairs. The cops found no one. Whoever it was bolted the second sirens cut the air. But they didn't leave empty-handed. Derek later added up what was missing, more than $22,000 in electronics, most of it barely unpacked. And then came the worst part. The officer said there were 2 distinct sets of footprints on the stairs. Not 1, 2. After that night, sleep abandoned me. Even though I wasn't touched, it felt like something inside me had been cracked wide open. Knowing someone had stood inches from my door, maybe assuming the upstairs was empty, chewed at my nerves day and night. My thoughts looped endlessly. If they'd gotten in, what would they have done when they found me? Ryan brushed it off. "It was probably just a smash and grab. You were never in danger." But I didn't believe him. I kept replaying the way that doorknob turned, slow, testing, patient. Not the rush of someone looting. The calculation of someone listening. Things soured quickly after. Josh accused Derek of setting it up, said it was too convenient Derek wasn't around when it happened. Derek started locking himself in his room, blasting music so loud the walls trembled, speaking to no one. I tried to keep out of it, but I couldn't ignore the way they kept leaving doors unlocked, even after everything. Twice I came home to find the back door wide open. When I asked about it, they just shrugged. Probably forgot. Don't worry so much. After the 3rd time, I stopped caring about politeness. I bought a chain lock and installed it on the upstairs door without asking. But soon it wasn't just paranoia. Little things shifted when I wasn't home. Once I came back to find my bedroom window, always locked, unlatched. Another time, my toothbrush was on the floor. Small things, but wrong. Wrong enough that I began keeping pepper spray by my bed. I stopped showering when I was alone in the house. Then one night around 3 a.m., I woke to footsteps. Not from downstairs. From above me. The attic. I froze, every nerve screaming. The attic wasn't accessible. Its entrance was sealed shut in the upstairs hallway ceiling. No stairs, no ladder, no reason anyone should be up there. Brian had told me it was locked years ago when the house was divided. And yet, I heard it. Slow, careful steps shifting weight across the beams. I held my breath until my chest ached, until I nearly passed out. Then finally silence. In the morning, I told Ryan. He just laughed. Probably squirrels. Old house like this, you hear things. But those weren't squirrels. I knew the weight of footsteps. 2 weeks later, I was gone. No notice. I packed everything I could fit into my car and left in the middle of the day while no one else was around. That night, I called the landlord and told him I was breaking the lease early. He didn't argue. He only said flatly, "You're not the first." Later, I learned there had been 2 other break-ins before us. Same back door, same stolen electronics, no arrests. And I still don't know who tried my doorknob that night. I just know that if I hadn't locked it, I probably wouldn't be here telling you this story. I used to brush off those gut feelings people swore by. Everyone talked about instincts like they were some kind of sixth sense, but to me, it always sounded like anxiety. Your brain tricking you into believing there was danger when really, there wasn't. At least that's what I thought. Now I know better. There's a real difference between nerves and that deep, bone-level knowing that something is wrong. This was back in November 2022, when I was living in Ballerton, a regional town about 90 minutes from Melbourne. I'd just gotten out of a long, exhausting relationship and wasn't looking for love, just some company, maybe a drink here and there. Nursing kept me busy enough, and the quiet evenings at home made me restless. So one night I re-downloaded Hinge. His name on the app was Marco Elias. His profile stood out immediately, too polished to ignore. Every photo showed him suited up, like he'd stepped out of a GQ spread. Wine glasses, rooftop parties, even one shot with a private jet in the background. His bio was short and sharp. Entrepreneur, traveler, fluent in Portuguese, and sarcasm. I rolled my eyes at that last part, but curiosity got the better of me. I swiped right. Within minutes, he matched and sent me a message. Finally, someone who doesn't open with "Hey, refreshing." I laughed out loud. My opener had been, "That coat makes you look like a Bond villain." And just like that, the conversation took off. By the next day, Marco was already asking to meet. Not in Ballerton, though. He was in Melbourne for work. He suggested St. Martin's Bar, a swanky rooftop spot I'd only ever seen on Instagram. I hesitated, but he offered to handle everything and even booked us a table. Before leaving, I texted my friend my location. Not because I expected trouble, just because. He met me at Southern Cross Station, and honestly, the man looked like he belonged on a movie poster. Tall, with thick dark hair slicked neatly back, a navy trench coat tailored within an inch of perfection, leather gloves tucked casually in his pocket. I wasn't sure if I was supposed to shake his hand or salute him. Before I could decide, he pulled me into a smooth hug and kissed my cheek. "God, you smell incredible," he said, low and certain. My brain scrambled to keep up. He slipped his hand into mine like it was the most natural thing in the world and steered me toward the street. It was forward, too forward, but he carried it with such easy confidence, I told myself it was cultural. Over cocktails at the bar, the conversation moved quickly, maybe too quickly. He asked about everything, my family, my job, even my childhood. And when I asked about his, he gave me a story that sounded ready for television. His father had died when he was 10. His mother had struggled, and he'd been sent to relatives in Portugal until finishing school. At 18, he'd gone back to Brazil to reunite with her before moving to Australia on a study visa. "I studied engineering," he said, shaking his head, "but I hated it. Logistics and transport, that's what moves the world. That's where I found myself." It was polished, almost rehearsed, like a speech he'd practiced dozens of times, but I had no reason not to believe him. He came across genuine, even old-fashioned, in this dramatic, chivalrous way that made me laugh. We ended the night at his temporary apartment in Docklands. He asked me upstairs, just to talk, and I knew every red flag waving in my head but still said yes. I promised myself I'd leave before midnight. The apartment was unexpected. Candles flickered on the counters, soft salsa music played, and 2 glasses of red wine were already poured. He grinned and said, "You told me you wanted to learn salsa, right? Consider this a preview." I laughed and shook my head. "You're ridiculous." But he pulled me in, and in the tiny space between the couch and the kitchen bench, he showed me a few basic steps. It was corny as hell, but effective. We kissed, a lot, but I kept a line. He didn't push. We eventually fell asleep on the couch, fully clothed. In the morning, he walked me out, hailed me a car, and spent the rest of the day texting me like nothing about the night had been unusual at all. You made last night feel like a dream. I hate to admit it, but I was smitten. God help me, I was smitten. The flood of affection came fast and heavy. Within 3 days, a package arrived at my door. Lingerie. Perfect size. I had never told him my size. A few days later, another box. Gold earrings and velvet. Then my birthday rolled around. He'd known me less than a week, yet I got flowers, a bracelet, and a voucher for a luxury spa. By the second week, he was inviting me on holiday. Queensland. Flights already booked, a private boat cruise, dinner at a friend's restaurant with a secret menu, even a helicopter ride just for the view. Don't worry about packing lingerie, he smirked. I've already taken care of that. That was the moment the alarms started screaming in my head. I don't have close family who'd notice right away if I went missing. The realization hit me hard. A man I barely knew was offering me a glossy cinematic trip, the kind you see right before someone gets murdered in Act 2. He claimed he worked in shipping. The irony didn't escape me. I half joked, "You could probably ship me off without a trace." He laughed way too hard. I had to know who he really was. My housemate and I dug. No family tagged on socials. His Instagram was a loop of solo shots. Suits, airports, pools, hotel rooms. His Facebook was locked down, except for one old 2016 post. A comment read, "So happy for you and Camilla. You two are perfect together." I scrolled through his followers until I found her, Camilla. Mid-30s, Brazilian. Her photos were older, none recent with him, but one showed him blurred in the background at a dinner table. Caption, "Family is everything." That's when I used Pay ID. I sent him $1. The registered name that popped up, Marco Vega Santos. Not Elias. I Googled it, adding Camilla's name. Hours later I found it, a civil court settlement in Brazil for unpaid debts. Both names listed, husband and wife. My stomach dropped. I texted him, asking for a photo of his passport, saying my friend needed his details for safety before the trip. He hesitated, but eventually sent one. His hand covered part of his face, details clumsily blacked out, but not well enough. His birth year, 1985. Not 28 like he told me, 37. I decided to play along. Over the next 2 weeks, the trip kept shifting. His business was delayed. His mother needed surgery. Then, his grandmother in Lisbon had a stroke, and he had to fly out immediately. That was my breaking point. I contacted Camila. I wasn't sure she'd reply, but she did. We spoke on the phone. Her voice trembled the entire time. She told me everything. Marco had never lived in Portugal. His family wasn't wealthy. They were middle-class Brazilians. He'd been married to her for 5 years. Controlling, manipulative, emotionally abusive. He refused to work, leeching off her income while pretending to be an entrepreneur and studying social work. Eventually, he left for Queensland and started targeting younger women online. I was the third woman to reach out to her. The same script, over and over. He used one to pay his tuition, another to bankroll his suits and flights, lies, love bombing, manipulation. And when the walls closed in, he vanished, always with stories of sick relatives or sudden emergencies. He wasn't just a liar, he was a predator, a seasoned one. I blocked him everywhere. For a week, he spammed my phone, my socials. Finally, I replied once, "I know, Marco. You should come clean." He panicked, said he was flying down to Ballerton immediately, begged me to let him explain. I lied. I told him I'd moved to Greenwich. 5 hours out, 1 train in and out daily. I said I couldn't pick him up, but I'd wait at the station. He flew. He trained. He texted a photo of himself standing in the rain outside the station, bags at his feet. That's when I sent my final message. You lied about your name, your age, your past, your marriage, your entire life. I'm not at the station. I never was. You're alone now, just like the rest of us were when you used us. Goodbye. Then I blocked him. And that was it. It took me months to feel safe again. Even now I flinch when someone offers too much, too soon. My chest tightens whenever I see someone in a navy trench coat. But if this story stops even one person from falling for a Marco of their own, then it's worth telling. Trust your gut. Always. Especially when they say all the right things. In college, your apartment isn't just four walls, it's your entire universe. By senior year, it becomes the place you eat, cry, pull all-nighters, and cling to whatever scraps of comfort you can find before life kicks you out into the real world. I was in my final year when I moved into a two-bedroom on-campus apartment at Hartley University in Northern California. The dorms were packed, so the school had started converting some of the older staff housing into temporary student apartments. That's how I landed there. I got lucky. Well, halfway lucky. My actual roommate, Nora, was gold. She and I had been living together since sophomore year, and by the time we were seniors, we were basically family. We'd picked each other for every summer abroad program, every spring break trip. We joked constantly that we'd burned through all our roommate luck on each other. And honestly, maybe we had. The other girls? A mixed bag. The second room was shared by Tessa and Lydia. Tessa was calm, soft-spoken with that quiet, artsy vibe. You barely noticed she was around half the time. Lydia, on the other hand, Lydia was pure chaos in human form. Loud, unpredictable, and a magnet for drama. She had a revolving door of guys she dragged home. And the kicker? She had a boyfriend. Not just any boyfriend, but Damon, a campus security officer. He was older, possessive, and the kind of man who gave off that low, simmering anger you felt before you even saw it on his face. He carried his gun even off duty, like he couldn't stand to be without it. You might wonder why Lydia would risk sneaking around when she had someone like that watching her every move. The answer was simple. Lydia thrived on danger, and the rest of us had to live inside her casino. It was mid-March, peak midterms, peak stress, and peak party season. That Friday was St. Patrick's Day, and the campus had exploded into chaos. Food trucks parked along the quad, live music blaring, students draped in green and glitter stumbling from one party to the next. By 8 p.m., Tessa and Lydia had bolted out the door in matching shamrock headbands, laughing too loudly and shouting back to us about not waiting up. Nora and I wanted no part of it. We'd been chained to our laptops all day, buried under papers, and our brains were fried. So we did what we always did. We ordered greasy takeout and queued up a friend's marathon. By 11 p.m., somewhere in the middle of season 5, the pounding started. Not a knock, pounding. Heavy fists slamming into the apartment door hard enough to rattle the frame. "Hey, can you let me in? I just need to borrow a phone." The voice was male, deep, slurred just slightly. Urgent, but not panicked. Nora grabbed the remote and turned down the TV, her brows drawn tight. "You think it's one of Lydia's guys?" she whispered. I sighed, already feeling the tension creep up my neck. Probably, or some drunk dude looking for the party. Either way, not our problem. Another round of pounding. Louder this time. "Hello? My phone's dead. I just need to make a call. Can you let me in, please?" We froze, staring at the door. Nora chewed on her lip, looking torn. We should help, right? What if he's actually in trouble? That uneasy twist gripped my stomach, that gut-deep warning that something wasn't right. I shook my head firmly. Nope, we're pretending we're asleep, not opening that door. The knocking dragged on for another minute, insistent and heavy. Then, silence. We sat in stillness, listening, hardly breathing. After what felt like forever, I got up and peeked through the peephole. The hallway was empty. "Gone," I whispered. Relief washed over me, but it was thin, flimsy. We tried to shake it off, turning the TV back up and forcing laughter. "Creepy rando," Nora muttered, curling under her blanket, but the tension lingered, sharp and unspoken. That's when both of our phones buzzed at the same time. The vibration was so sudden it made me jump. We glanced at each other, then at the screens. It was a campus-wide alert, the kind of automated text we usually got during power outages or lockdown drills. Emergency alert. Incident reported on campus. Location, Cedar Hall Apartments. Status, stabbing reported. Suspect at large. Avoid area if possible. Authorities investigating. My throat closed up. Cedar Hall was our building. I turned to Nora, my voice barely audible. It says there was a stabbing. Here. We sat frozen, staring at each other. The room suddenly too quiet, too small. I opened the campus news app with trembling fingers, and there it was, already filling up with posts. Grainy photos, rumors flying, students typing in frantic caps about what they'd seen or heard. And that thin sense of relief we'd felt just moments ago shattered completely. A police car, an ambulance, blood smeared across a stairwell. "Wait," Nora whispered, her eyes glued to the glowing alert on her phone. "Our building, but which apartment?" We sat in silence, waiting, refreshing again. 30 long minutes dragged past like hours. Then someone on the anonymous campus message board dropped a grainy photo. The outside of Unit 14B, the unit directly above ours. I remember Nora's reaction perfectly. Her voice broke as she said, No, it couldn't be. But it could. And it was. The girl upstairs, Amelia, had been attacked. We barely knew her. She was quiet, a recent transfer, the kind of person who kept her head down in the laundry room and never lingered in the hallways. That night, she made the mistake of opening the door to a stranger who claimed he just needed to borrow a phone. She let him in. Seconds later, he snatched a knife from her kitchen counter and drove it into her stomach 4 times. Somehow bleeding, she managed to crawl back toward her door and scream before collapsing. By the time anyone reached her, the man had already vanished. And it wasn't just that he'd run off. The campus was teeming with people. Thousands of drunk, costumed students flooding every path, every sidewalk. He'd slipped into that chaos as if he'd never existed, dissolved into the crowd like smoke. Police later confirmed he wasn't a student, wasn't faculty, wasn't staff. They couldn't tie him to Amelia in any way. The attack had no motive. Nothing was stolen. It wasn't personal. It was violence, pure and senseless. Someone prowling around looking for a door to open. That night, sleep was impossible. Nora shoved her dresser against our door, her face pale and tight. I sat awake until nearly 3 a.m., clutching my metal water bottle like it could double as a weapon. Every creak of the building set my teeth on edge. Morning didn't make things better. The air in Cedar Hall was suffocating, a sick silence hanging over everything. Police still canvassed the stairwells, their radios crackling softly, while campus officials in suits tried to project calm they clearly didn't feel. I overheard one official mutter something that made my blood run cold. Unit 14B hadn't been the first apartment he tried. The first door he'd knocked on hadn't opened. That first door was almost certainly ours. We lived directly under Amelia's place, directly beside the stairwell. I sat down hard on our couch, trembling, the memory of his voice replaying in my mind on an endless loop. "Can I borrow your phone?" The same words, the same tone. Nora and I locked eyes, our voices overlapping in unison. Holy shit. Classes were canceled that Monday. Officially, it was in solidarity with the victim. Everyone knew the truth. Campus security had no leads, and panic was spreading fast. Amelia survived. Barely. Last we heard, she was in the ICU with a ruptured liver. She never came back to Hartley. She just disappeared from our lives as quietly as she'd entered them. When Lydia finally stumbled in the next day, glitter still smeared across her face, she scoffed like it was all an inconvenience. "Well, that's creepy, I guess. Glad I wasn't home." Her boyfriend, Damon, the campus security officer, suddenly started hanging around constantly after that. His presence didn't comfort us. If anything, it made the apartment feel tighter, tenser, like even safety had teeth. The rest of that semester, Nora and I checked the peephole every single time someone knocked. Even after graduation, that habit clung to me. To this day, a knock at the door freezes me in place, my skin prickling. We never learned who the man was. Some people whispered he was mentally ill, spiraling and desperate. Others insisted he was a predator who wanted to kill just to see what it felt like. All I know is this: he knocked on our door first. We didn't answer. That one small moment of hesitation, choosing silence, might be the only reason I'm alive. Years later, I visited Nora in San Diego. We were drinking wine, laughing, retelling old college stories to her fiancé. When I brought up Cedar Hall, his face turned serious. "Wait," he said, leaning forward. "Was that the Cedar Hall stabbing? The one that made the news out here? They never caught the guy, right?" I nodded slowly. "No, they didn't." He exhaled, shaking his head. "That's insane. Makes you wonder where he went, what else he's done since." The room fell quiet. His words echoed long after the laughter died. And I couldn't stop thinking, he could be anywhere. Maybe still knocking, still waiting, still hoping someone will open the door. I hadn't planned on stepping out that night. Honestly, I'd been wrung out by the week already. 2 grueling back-to-back shifts at the animal clinic had left my body aching, and then the email from my landlord, an $80 rent hike starting next month, hit like another gut punch. To top it off, Caleb, my closest friend, had bailed on our weekend plans yet again, 3rd time in a row. I felt invisible, unimportant. So there I was, sitting in my apartment, a little tipsy from the couple of drinks I'd downed while half-heartedly cleaning, humming with that restless, anxious kind of energy that makes your walls feel too close, your own skin too tight. Staying in felt unbearable. It was a Friday in late May, sticky and humid even after dark, the kind of heat that clung to you. I remember checking the clock, 10:37 p.m., and then deciding, almost impulsively, that I had to get out. I slipped on a black t-shirt dress that barely reached mid-thigh, laced up my sneakers, tossed my essentials into my crossbody bag, and walked out into the thick night air. My destination was the Foxhole, a dive bar just a few blocks away from my place in Dakar, Georgia. Looking back, that was my first mistake. By the time I got there, the alcohol already softened my edges. I wasn't stumbling or slurring, just that loose, buzzy kind of drunk where your instincts quiet down, where the little voice that usually nags "be careful" gets muffled. I didn't text Kayla. I didn't call my sister. I didn't even drop a quick update in our Made It Home Safe group chat. That silence. Mistake number 2. The Foxhole was exactly what I expected. Dim and warm, with the jukebox groaning out half-forgotten 90s tracks while clusters of half-drunk 20-somethings screamed over pool tables. The ceiling fan overhead clattered with every rotation, pushing around air heavy with citrus cleaner and cheap whiskey. I ordered a gin and tonic, slid into a small 2-person table near the back, and pulled out my phone, just to look busy. I wasn't trying to meet anyone. I wasn't dressed for it, and God knows I didn't feel it. I just wanted to be out, to remind myself that I existed in the world outside of my apartment. At some point, 2 women came over, smiling, asking if they could share my table. I said sure. We made small talk. Drinks, work, nothing that stuck. I can't even remember their names now. They seemed nice enough, maybe carrying their own private kinds of restlessness. Eventually, they drifted toward the dance floor, leaving me alone again, staring at the condensation sliding down my glass. That's when I noticed him. A man sat across from me at a high-top table, thick, dark mustache, skin pale and stretched tight across his face. Something about the way his cheeks pulled against his bones looked wrong. He wasn't drinking. No glass on the table. No friends nearby. He wasn't scanning the room the way bored barflies do. He was just staring. At me. His gaze didn't feel like simple curiosity. It was sharp, deliberate, almost predatory, like he was writing something across me with his eyes. I looked away quickly, telling myself it was nothing. Drugs, maybe, or mental illness, or both. My skin prickled, but it wasn't terror yet, not exactly. Just a low thrum of discomfort. I didn't feel cute. I wasn't in the mood to flirt. His attention confused me more than anything. I was finishing the last watered-down sip of my drink, debating whether to order another or just call an Uber, when suddenly, he was beside me. "You're Morgan, right?" The voice was so close I flinched. My phone nearly slipped from my hand. I hadn't seen him move, hadn't seen him leave his table. He was just there, sliding into the seat across from me like he belonged there, like we'd planned this. Startled, I forced a polite smile. No, I'm not Morgan." I hesitated, stupidly, and gave him my real name. Looking back now, I know, that was mistake number 3. He didn't blink, didn't acknowledge the correction. Just tilted his head, shaking it once, slowly. "No, you're Morgan, that's your name." His tone wasn't playful, wasn't teasing. It was flat, certain. My laugh came out brittle, strained. "Okay, well, I'm not, but what's up?" I tried to sound casual, like brushing off weirdness would make it less threatening. He leaned in, the stale smell of his clothes brushing against me. His face was close enough that I could see his eyes, an unnatural shade of green, too bright, too cold. "What do you want to own someday, Morgan?" My heart gave a hard, stuttering knock against my ribs, like my body already knew something my brain refused to name. "Huh?" I whispered, trying to buy time. "What do you want to own someday?" he repeated, voice steady, as though this was the most reasonable question in the world to ask a stranger in a bar. I should have ignored him. I should have stood up and walked away without a word. But I was alone, tipsy and terrified of escalating things. My hands were trembling beneath the table, so I forced myself to answer, my voice too light, too careful. "I don't know. Nothing really." His face shifted immediately, his brow furrowed, lips curling in disgust. He stared at me the way someone might look at a dog that had bitten their hand, half offended, half enraged. "That's pathetic," he said flatly. "Everyone wants to own something." The words hit harder than they should have. I felt myself shrinking beneath his gaze, shoulders tightening, throat dry. "Okay, maybe a house. Someday." He clicked his tongue, slow and deliberate, shaking his head like I'd failed some silent test. "You don't deserve one." My pulse thundered in my ears. I blinked hard. "Excuse me?" "People like you," he said, his voice dropping into a hushed rasp, "don't get houses." I tried to laugh, tried to act like it was just another drunk creep saying weird shit in a bar. "Okay, listen." He cut me off with a smile. But it wasn't warm, wasn't human. It was a slow, knowing curve of his lips that never reached his eyes. "You can sit here," he murmured, "but only if you're not on anything, not drinking more tonight, and not planning to murder me." I forced a chuckle, nervous and clumsy. "Yeah, joke's on you. I left my axe at home." My attempt at humor felt brittle in the air. His reply wasn't brittle. "I can't promise I'm going to let you live." The words slipped from his mouth in a calm, even tone. No drama, no menace layered in, just steady and final, like a doctor delivering a diagnosis. I swear the air in that moment turned colder. My arms prickled as though I'd been shoved into a walk-in freezer. I'd heard lines like that before, in crime shows, in novels, in campy thrillers. But the way he said it, the way his eyes locked onto mine with an unnatural stillness, something older, something inhuman. It wasn't performance. It was a warning. He meant it. I stood so quickly my half-empty glass tipped, spilling gin across the table and down my dress. "I need to go," I blurted, not to him, not to anyone, just to the universe. I pushed past him and made a beeline for the bar, my sneakers squeaking against the sticky floor. Trish, the bartender who'd poured my drink earlier, looked up from stacking glasses. I leaned across the bar, my voice a shaky whisper. "That guy, mustache, green eyes, he's freaking me out. He said he might kill me. I think he's on something." Trish didn't ask questions. Her expression tightened and she gave a sharp nod before motioning to the bouncer. I glanced back. Mustache Man didn't argue, didn't protest. He just rose from the chair, movements slow and deliberate, and smiled at me one last time before walking out. It wasn't defeat in that smile. It was satisfaction, as if everything had gone exactly the way he wanted. Like I had either passed or failed a test I didn't understand. I pulled out my phone and called an Uber before even setting foot outside. My heart pounded against my ribs the entire ride home, my eyes flicking to every car that pulled too close, every shadow on the sidewalk. At my apartment, I locked the door, dragged a chair under the knob, and slept with a kitchen knife clutched beneath my pillow. The next morning, I tried to convince myself it was nothing. Maybe he was high. Maybe he was just a creep who got off on messing with drunk women in bars. But the memory clung to me like smoke, thick and bitter. How did he know the name Morgan? Why did he get so furious when I gave the wrong answer? A few days later, I went back to the Foxhole early in the evening, before the weekend crowd filled the place. Trish was behind the bar again. I walked up, awkward and sheepish, and thanked her for stepping in. Then I asked, "Hey, has that guy been back? The mustache guy from Friday, the one you kicked out?" Trish paused, giving me a strange, puzzled look. "Who?" "The mustache guy," I repeated, my voice rising. "Pale skin, green eyes, the one you threw out after I told you he scared me." Her forehead creased. She shook her head slowly. "Sweetheart, I didn't kick anyone out Friday. We didn't have any trouble at all. I was the only one working till midnight." The room tilted. My mouth opened, then closed again. No words came out. "But," she added, bending down beneath the bar, "I did find this under the seat you were at when I was cleaning up. Thought it might be yours." She handed me a napkin, folded twice. I opened it with clumsy fingers, and my stomach dropped. The paper was scrawled over in thick, jagged all-caps writing. "You don't even know who you are. I'll see you again, Morgan." The napkin trembled in my hands. My skin turned ice cold. I never went back to the Foxhole. I changed my locks, started shopping during the day instead of late at night. I told all my friends, filed a police report, bought pepper spray. But I never saw him again. Or at least, I don't think I did. Because sometimes on crowded sidewalks I'll catch a flash of a mustache, a pair of green eyes, and my breath stops cold in my chest. Because maybe I am Morgan. Or worse, maybe I was just the wrong girl in the right bar, and next time, the next one won't be so lucky. I grew up in a neighborhood called Willow Creek Hollow, about 15 or 20 minutes east of downtown Cleveland. On the surface, it looked like one of those glossy suburban postcard towns. Broad, tree-lined streets where old maples arched into golden tunnels in the fall, and every house sat neatly spaced, just enough to grant privacy without the isolation. People smiled and waved while walking their dogs. Kids dragged out hockey nets in the summer and turned the street into their rink. It was safe. It was calm. Sometimes, almost too calm, like the silence itself pressed on you. But I loved it. I'll always carry that place somewhere inside me, like a folded blanket I can pull over myself whenever life grows too loud. Still, there's one part I wish I could cut clean from memory. One family. The Harringtons. If you've ever lived next to people who made your skin crawl without ever actually breaking the law, maybe you'll understand. But the Harringtons weren't just unpleasant neighbors, they were worse. They made you wonder if cruelty could pass through bloodlines, the same way poor eyesight or high cholesterol does. There were 4 of them. Miles, the father, Dolores, the mother, and their 2 boys, Evan and Lyle. They arrived when I was about 15. I remember the moving truck because it groaned into the driveway on a gray, rainy Tuesday in March. From my upstairs window, I watched a man in a Hawaiian shirt and bleach-stained jeans bark at the movers like he was leading a military drill. That was Miles Harrington. From day one, he radiated the wrong kind of energy. He was tall, but his neck stooped forward like a vulture's. Always chewing something. Gum, toothpicks, whatever he could work between his teeth. His eyes twitched, darting in little jerks, like he never quite landed on you. And when he smiled, it was unsettling. His mouth stretched into a grin, but his eyes stayed lifeless. When he said hello, it felt less like a greeting and more like a warning dipped in honey. Dolores was odd in a different way. She looked like she'd been chasing a beauty pageant that ended 20 years too late. Thick, caked-on makeup. Perfume so strong you could smell it from across the street. And clothes that seemed ripped out of a different decade. Tight satin blouses, leopard prints, high heels even for grocery runs. She rarely spoke, though. Mostly she watched. Really watched. Like her eyes lingered too long, memorizing every detail. Their older son, Evan, was maybe 17 or 18. Always swallowed inside a hoodie, greasy brown hair covering half his face. His posture sagged, his head bent forward like gravity was punishing him. He scribbled on his arms with markers constantly, his skin a canvas of half-faded doodles. My friend Jess swore she saw him once hunched at the edge of the woods, carving something into a tree with a switchblade. Then there was Lyle, the younger one, 11 or 12, thin as a rail, skin so pale it looked almost translucent. He wandered barefoot even in the middle of winter, and he carried a Polaroid camera everywhere. Click, flash, click, flash. He photographed everything, people, dogs, cars, even mailboxes. But he never showed the photos. Just snapped them, tucked them away, and drifted off without a word. At first, we all tried to shrug it off. Weird neighbors aren't against the law. But then little things started happening. The first time it happened to me was my junior year of high school. Dusk had settled in, that soft purplish light before the street lamps kick on, and I was walking home from Jess's place. We'd wasted the afternoon on bad horror movies and avoided trig homework like our lives depended on it. As I passed the Harringtons' house, 114 Willow Lane, I noticed Lyle sitting on the curb. He had something cradled in his lap. When I got closer, my stomach clenched. It was a rabbit. Dead. Its eyes were frozen open, glassy, and its belly was ripped wide, a gory zipper of fur and blood. My throat seized, and I gagged hard. "Lyle!" I managed, my voice catching. "What the hell are you doing?" He didn't look up. He just raised the Polaroid. Click. Flash. Then, in a whisper so soft I almost thought I imagined it, he said, "It was still warm." I bolted, running the rest of the way home. The image burned into my mind. And things only escalated from there. Not long after, our neighbor across the street, Mr. Bernard, found a note on his car windshield, the handwriting jagged, scrawled in black marker. It said, "Don't funning park here again." The thing was, Mr. Bernard hadn't parked anywhere wrong that week, yet somehow someone had slashed his tires. My friend Rachel's little brother swore he saw Evan trailing him from the park one afternoon, keeping just enough distance to avoid detection, just close enough to make the boy's stomach knot with fear. We swapped stories like soldiers trading battlefield tales, whispers exchanged under bedroom doors and across kitchen tables, but no one could ever prove a thing. That was the Harrington way. Quiet terror, small cracks forming slowly until they felt unavoidable. The most unsettling encounter I had with Miles Harrington happened at the gas station off Route 43. It was late, around 9:30, and I'd run out for tampons and a Coke. I was wandering down the snack aisle, reaching for a bag of chips, when a voice slid into my ear. "Evening, sunshine." I froze. He was leaning casually against the end of the aisle, hands buried in his jacket pockets. That same twisted half-grin. His eyes, dark, unreadable, pinned me. I nodded, hoping that would end it. and went for the drink. But when I glanced back, he'd shifted, standing far too close, almost brushing my shoulder. "Don't worry," he said. "You're growing up nice. Bet the boys at school can hardly keep their mouths shut." I couldn't speak. He chuckled, that quiet, knowing chuckle, and strolled off like it was nothing. I didn't buy the Coke. I couldn't. Another time, my mom asked me to deliver a letter that had been accidentally dropped into our mailbox. My stomach clenched, but she insisted it was just polite. I knocked. Dolores answered. One hand held a tangled ball of yarn, the other a cracked porcelain doll head. Her stare stretched longer than any normal greeting. Finally, a smile. "Oh, darling girl," she said. "Did you know Ring Around the Rosie is about the plague?" Yeah, I think I'd heard that before. "Some say it's just a myth," she continued, "but some things are remembered for a reason, don't you think?" She still smiled as she closed the door. And all the while, Lyle watched from the window, Polaroid raised, clicking silently. Then came late November. Something happened that made the neighborhood collectively hold its breath. Ashley, a quiet girl from a street over, chess lover, computer science whiz, vanished. Her parents claimed she went for a walk and never returned. Search parties scoured the streets, posters plastered every lamppost, local news covered it, but there was nothing. Then a week later, her backpack was found in the woods behind Willow Lane, ripped and grimy, stuffed with Polaroids. Not of her, but of us. Neighborhood kids snapped in candid, eerie detail. In one photo, the corner of a Harrington mailbox was unmistakable. Police questioned them. But, predictably, without hard evidence, they walked free. No charges. Nothing stuck. Winter arrived, and with it, a silence that weighed on the neighborhood. No one trick-or-treated, no carols. Doors stayed locked, lights dimmed, as if everyone collectively prayed the Harringtons would vanish on their own. Then, one night, it all escalated. Around 3 a.m., I woke to screams. My mom and I sprinted outside. Flames consumed the Harrington house, licking the sky, smoke curling into the cold air. Sirens blared in the distance, and in the street, utterly still, stood Lyle, camera in hand. The edges singed, but the device, and him, was unscathed. I never learned the true cause of the fire. Rumors flew, gas leak, arson, even divine punishment according to a trembling Mr. Bernard. Officially, electrical fault. Unofficially, the Harringtons disappeared that night, leaving nothing behind but memories and dread. I'm 28 now, moved far away, married, own a home of my own. But sometimes that old feeling creeps back, the prickling sensation of eyes on me. Last month, a package arrived, no return address. Inside, 7 Polaroids. Me, my husband, my kid, all captured from outside my house. And tucked among them, a note in red marker, jagged and raw, still warm. I used to think my mom just hated fun. That was the simplest explanation when you're 11 years old and staring out a window at the other kids laughing in the sunlight while you're stuck inside. At that age, nothing feels crueler than being told no when the whole world is calling your name. We lived on Pinefield Terrace, a dead-end street in a working-class neighborhood just south of Bakersfield. The houses were small, sagging a little but not completely falling apart. Dust clung to the roads, chain-link fences boxed in every yard, and dogs barked so constantly it felt like the soundtrack of the street. Our house was a pale blue rectangle with paint peeling in sheets, the way sunburn peels after a bad day at the beach. My mom, Lena Morales, worked herself raw at 2 jobs just to keep that roof over us. She'd had my sister Camilla at 17, then me 2 years later. My dad had never been in the picture, and Camilla's dad died in a car wreck before she even had a chance to be born. We didn't have much, but Mom always managed the essentials: food, clothes, and an old second-hand TV that sometimes pulled in 3 channels if you angled the antenna just right. But none of that mattered to me as a kid. All I saw was a prison, a window to a world I wasn't allowed to touch. "No playing in the street? I mean it," she'd say. And every time I argued, pressing my forehead against the glass, she'd give the same flat reply. "That's exactly why you're not." Her eyes would glaze over like she wasn't even in the room, and her voice would drop into this exhausted monotone. I hated it. Hated the double locks on the doors, the way she peeked through the curtains before letting anyone inside, the rule that we couldn't even walk to the corner store without her. She decided everything, when we went out, who we saw, what we watched. At 11, I thought she was paranoid, maybe unhinged. I told myself she was just overprotective. But years later, when I'd already moved out for college, we sat down for one of the most honest conversations of my life. And I finally learned the truth. It started with the house one over from ours, separated by a vacant lot that always smelled like beer and weeds. The house itself was a squat, tan block with foil over the windows and a garage door that never opened. People came and went at all hours, headlights sweeping across our bedroom ceilings at 2 or 3 in the morning. Sometimes we heard laughter, sharp and wild, cut short by screaming, sometimes glass shattering. Once a sound I now know was a gunshot, but back then it all blended into the strange nighttime soundtrack of Pinefield Terrace. As kids, Camilla and I called them the Night Family. We'd dare each other to sneak to the blinds and peek. We made up stories, vampires, secret agents, maybe even aliens. That fantasy made it easier to live with. The truth was something else entirely. "I never told you because I didn't want you to grow up afraid," Mom said the summer after my sophomore year. We were sitting on the back patio of her new duplex in Stockton, miles away from the street we grew up on. Camilla was inside, clattering pots around while she made dinner. I had just told Mom how different life felt since moving away, how I hadn't realized how tense I'd been as a kid until that tension was gone. She went quiet. "I don't know if I did the right thing," she said eventually. "Keeping you and your sister locked in like that, I couldn't take the risk." Her face looked softer in that moment. Not strict, not angry, just afraid. Even years later, far from Pinefield Terrace, the fear was still there. "What risk?" I asked. She hesitated, then said, "You remember the Floors house? The Night Family?" I laughed at the memory, but she didn't. Her expression stayed fixed. "That wasn't a game, honey. They were monsters." Her voice didn't waver when she said it. Only once did it crack. When she told me about the night she looked out her window and saw 2 men dragging a girl out the back door and into a rusted van. The girl was barely conscious. "She had pink sneakers," Mom said. "That's what I can't forget. Bright little shoes kicking just for a moment, then going still." My chest tightened. I wanted to tell her she must have been mistaken, that maybe she imagined it. But the look in her eyes was too raw. Mom went on. "The Floors place wasn't just some drug den. It was a pipeline. Girls, young girls, teenagers, sometimes even younger." My mom's voice was heavy when she told me. Those were the ones they targeted. They invited them over for parties, lured them in with drugs, drinks, and promises of belonging. "They had a system," she said bitterly, shaking her head like the words themselves were poison. "They'd get them high, meth mostly. And once they were hooked, they'd get passed around, not just to people in the house, to others. People who paid." I swallowed hard, my mouth dry, but she wasn't finished. "They took pictures, videos. Then they'd use them as blackmail. 'You want your parents to see this?' they'd threaten. 'Or maybe we'll call the cops, tell them you're a dealer.' These girls were trapped. They didn't know how to get out. Some even brought their friends, thinking it was just a party. That's how they grew their circle." My skin crawled. The air felt too thin to breathe. Then her voice went quiet, deadly quiet. "They tried to lure Camilla once." I froze. My fork clattered against the table. "What?" "She was 12, Mom said. Came home from school with a note. 'Come hang out with us tonight. We got a trampoline and pizza.'" Jesus. I tore it up in front of her. She continued, her jaw tight. And I told her never to talk to anyone from that house again. That's when I started locking everything up. That's when I started keeping you both inside. I watched that place like a hawk. I couldn't say anything, but they knew. They knew I was watching. She leaned forward, her hands twisting together. That's when the threat started. Men from the house, sometimes older, sometimes barely older than me, waited for her when she got home from work. They blocked her path, their voices low and sharp. You think you're better than us? Keep your nose out of our business. Next time you peek through your window, it might be the last thing you see. Once, she found a dead cat on our porch. Its throat slit, something carved into its fur. She never told us. She just stuffed it into a trash bag, carried it to the alley, and burned it. She tried calling the cops once. A patrol car showed up, crawled past the Floors house, made a note, and drove away. They didn't knock. They didn't go inside. And nothing changed. A week later, someone keyed our car, spray-painted "rat" across our fence in dripping black letters. Mom never called again. Her voice trembled when she spoke next. I couldn't afford to move. Couldn't send you to some private school. All I could do was keep you inside, where I knew you were safe. Eventually, the house got raided. Camilla was in high school by then. I was already away at college. It happened at 4 a.m. SWAT, helicopters, flashbangs. The whole street lit up like a war zone. They took everyone. Inside, they found dozens of girls, weapons, cash, drugs, and something else. An altar, Mom whispered. In the garage, pictures, bones, chickens, candles. They worshipped something called Santa Muerte. I'd heard of it. Death's folk saint. For some, a protector. For others, a shield to hide darker things. I used to hear chanting at night, she said. Roosters screaming. Goats. I think they were sacrificing animals. Maybe worse. I didn't ask what worse meant. I didn't want to know. We sat in silence. The backyard felt colder, the shadows heavier. I looked at my mother, the woman I had once believed was unfair, paranoid, cruel. She was none of those things. She had been terrified, and she had been brave. I'm sorry, I whispered. Don't be, she said softly. Just don't ever go back there. 6 months later, the house was demolished. Too much bad press, too many bodies found under the floorboards. It was cheaper to level it than to sell it. Now it's just an empty lot. Dirt, weeds, broken glass. But I still dream about it. About the girl with the pink sneakers. About the flicker of candlelight behind foil-covered windows. About the dead cat. The whispers through the wall. And sometimes, on the quietest nights, I hear a voice in the dark. Too low to understand. Too sharp to ignore. And I think of my mother, standing at the window, watching, waiting, surviving. I grew up in a quiet little town in northern Pennsylvania called Fairview, the kind of place you'd think trouble skipped right over. Winters were buried in snow, summers were filled with baseball games, and most neighbors kept to themselves but still managed a polite wave when you passed by. My family wasn't wealthy, but we were steady. Dad worked for the county water department, Mom cleaned houses, and me, I was 19, juggling part-time shifts at the local grocery store while chipping away at online college classes. Life was simple, predictable, until the Daltons showed up. Our old neighbors, the Parkers, were a sweet retired couple who baked pies that smelled like cinnamon and butter, always waving from their porch whenever we pulled into our driveway. When they moved to Florida, it felt like losing a piece of home. Their house sat empty for a few weeks. Then, like a storm blowing in overnight, the Daltons arrived. No knock on our door, no friendly hellos. Just a beat-up van with mismatched doors, a rusty trailer full of dented furniture, and angry voices echoing across the street as they hauled their lives inside. We tried to tell ourselves new people are always a little closed off at first, that maybe they'd warm up. But they didn't. The father, Keith, was a heavy-set man with a permanent scowl carved deep into his face. His thinning hair was always slicked back with grease. His shirt stretched tight across his stomach. His wife, Janelle, looked like she hadn't had a full night's sleep in years. She smoked constantly, twitching with nervous energy, her eyes darting like a rabbit waiting for a hawk to strike. They had 3 kids, 2 boys, 9 and 11, who seemed wild and unsupervised, and a teenage girl who couldn't have been older than 16. Her name was Lily. Lily was different. She never smiled, never spoke. Every evening she'd sit curled on the porch steps, knees drawn to her chest, staring into the dark line of woods behind our houses. There was something haunted about her silence, something that made the air feel heavy. The only time I ever saw her face change was when fear slipped through, and she looked scared often. My mom, ever the peacemaker, baked a loaf of banana bread and carried it over, hoping it might be an olive branch. Janelle answered the door, took the bread without a word, and shut the door in her face. No thank you, no smile. That was the last time we tried. 2 months later, the music started. It wasn't just loud, it was violent. The kind of bass that rattled your ribs and shook picture frames off the wall. Midnight until 3, sometimes 4 in the morning, every night. At first, we thought maybe it was just kids being reckless, blowing off steam. But it became obvious it wasn't random. It was deliberate. My dad went over more than once, pounding on the door, asking them to turn it down. They ignored him, or worse, shouted through the door. Mind your own funning business. One night, fed up and red-faced, Dad shouted back that he was calling the cops. That was when Keith stormed outside. He got nose to nose with my dad, his breath sour and hot, voice low and full of venom. You ever come on my property again, he growled, I'll bury you under it. The cops came when we called, sure, but what good did it do? They handed out noise violations, and Keith knew exactly how to play innocent when they arrived. Calm, polite, almost smirking. But behind closed doors, the mask slipped. We saw Janelle's arms speckled with fresh bruises one week. The next, Keith showed up with a swollen black eye. Screaming matches exploded through the thin walls at night. Violent, ugly shouting that rose and fell like a storm. Sometimes there'd be the crash of glass breaking, doors slamming hard enough to shake our own windows. Fairview had never felt unsafe to me before. But with the Daltons next door, the air itself seemed heavy, poisoned, like the whole neighborhood was holding its breath. The kind of violence that made your stomach twist in knots at 2 in the morning, when you lay awake in the dark, powerless, listening to the crashes and screams bleed through the walls. It was the kind of sound that made you grip your sheets tighter, knowing there was nothing you could do without risking your own family. And Lily, poor, fragile Lily. One night I caught her trying to slip through the side gate around 2 a.m. Her thin frame was barely visible in the glow of the porch light. When she realized I was watching from my window, she froze, her face pale with terror. For a second I thought about whispering her name, telling her to run, to keep going. But then Keith's voice thundered from the porch. Get your ass back inside. She didn't hesitate. She bolted, her bare feet slapping the concrete, disappearing into the shadows of that house like she'd never even tried. My mom cried that night, sat at the kitchen table with her face buried in her hands. I should have called Child Protective Services, she said, voice trembling. Dad just shook his head, jaw tight. You think they'd do anything? By the time they looked into it, that girl might already be dead. He didn't know how close to the truth he was. Then, almost suddenly, the chaos stopped. One night after another explosion of screams and thuds, the music ended. For good. No more lights flicking on at 3 a.m. No more arguments spilling into the driveway, no more glass shattering. The silence was eerie, unnatural, like the house itself had gone to sleep. Mom thought maybe they'd finally been evicted. Dad guessed Keith had been arrested. But then the boys showed up in the yard again, wrestling and yelling like nothing had changed. Janelle came out to smoke. Keith still made beer runs to the gas station. Only Lily was gone. At first we told ourselves she must be inside. grounded maybe. But a week passed, then another. One afternoon I saw the younger boy pedaling his bike down the street and called out, "Hey, where's your sister?" He gave me this strange blank look, then said flatly, "She ran away." And just like that, he sped off, like it was nothing. But something in his tone stuck with me, coiled in my gut like a knot. 2 weeks later, our street filled with flashing lights, police cars, unmarked sedans, forensic vans. Men and women in white suits carried bags and boxes out of the Dalton house while yellow tape wrapped the block like a noose. For nearly 4 days we weren't allowed through without giving statements. They even searched our backyard, combing through bushes and turning over trash bins, like maybe the Daltons had tossed evidence over the fence. The truth took time to unravel, but the local paper eventually pieced it together. Lily had run away, just like the boy said. She'd made it to a shelter 2 towns over, stayed there for 5 days. 5 days of fragile freedom before Keith and Janelle found her. Security footage showed them dragging her into their van in broad daylight. Nobody stopped them. Legally, they were still her parents. They drove her out to the woods near Lake Elms, beat her, left her broken. Whether they meant to kill her or not, they never called for help. No ambulance, no hospital. Instead, they buried her in a shallow grave near a hunting shack that belonged to Keith's cousin. Keith cracked after 4 hours of interrogation, confessed it all. Said he just wanted to teach her a lesson for running away. The details that came out after were worse than anything I'd imagined. Bruises, broken ribs, a fractured skull. The coroner found older injuries too, proof of years of abuse she'd carried in silence. Janelle was arrested with him. She'd helped cover it up. Both were charged with second-degree murder, child abuse, neglect, obstruction of justice. The boys were taken away, I don't know where. Maybe to relatives, maybe foster care. The Dalton house sat empty for months, hollow and rotting like a wound. Eventually it went up for auction, bought by some couple who renovated it, painted it fresh, and moved in. They'll never know what happened inside those walls. We still live in Fairview, but nothing feels the same. Dad installed cameras around the house. Mom keeps the curtains drawn, even during the day. As for me, I still get a chill every time a white van drives past our street. And sometimes, when the nights are still and the woods are too quiet, I think of Lily. The way she crouched on that porch, knees to her chest, staring into the trees as if she already knew her future waited for her out there. She lived in hell, and no one saved her. That's what haunts me most. That we were just one wall away the entire time. That even when evil is right next door, sometimes no one hears you scream. I grew up in a place called Grenon, a small town tucked away in the English countryside, the kind of place where the pubs closed early, the corner shops pulled down their shutters by 6, and gossip traveled quicker than any car on the high street. Nothing much ever seemed to happen there, at least nothing worth remembering, not until what I'm about to tell you. Back then, you could go a whole lifetime in Grenon without ever locking your doors or worrying about what your neighbors were up to. That fragile sense of safety, of trust, died with the Prestwoods. If you'd told me when I was a kid that one day the most shocking crime in the county's history would take place just a few houses down from mine, I'd have laughed it off. Not because it was funny, because it simply wouldn't have made sense. The Prestwood family. Odd, yes. Reclusive, certainly. But evil? We didn't even have the vocabulary for something like that back then. Not until after it all came out. Let me start at the beginning. Back when the name Elliot Prestwood meant nothing more to me than a pale, strange boy in class, before I came to associate it with everything that followed. The Prestwoods moved into the corner house on Wexley Lane the summer before I started primary school. I remember it clearly because my mom baked a lemon drizzle cake to welcome them. She rang their bell, stood there with the tin wrapped in foil, smiling, but the door never opened. Instead, we saw a shape move behind the curtain, the faintest parting of fabric, and then nothing. They let the bell ring out, never acknowledging her. That was how they were from the start, detached, sealed off. The father, Martin Prestwood, worked nights at the distribution center outside town. The mother, Diane, was rarely spotted except when she came out to peg laundry on the line. Always the same gray jumper, even in the thick of summer, her hair pinned tightly back. They had one child, Elliot. Elliot wasn't bad at first, just off. For the first 2 years of school, he didn't speak. I don't mean he was quiet. I mean not a single word passed his lips. Teachers assumed he had some condition, and they tiptoed around it, the way adults do when they don't want to spook the other children. Then, one random afternoon in year 3, he broke the silence. The teacher asked about the Romans, and Elliot's voice rang out clear and sure, like it had been waiting under pressure all that time. He said, "Julius Caesar was assassinated in 44 BC. Et tu, Brute?" The whole room went silent. Even the teacher froze. It wasn't just that he spoke, it was the way he said it, so precise, so rehearsed. And then, just as quickly, he shut down again. No smile, no pride, not even a glance around to see our reactions. He just stared forward, blank like a switch had been flipped off. That was Elliot. Brilliant, but in a way that unsettled you, like someone was home, but didn't want you knocking at the door. We were 10 when the first real crack in the facade appeared. At break one day, Frankie Bowl nicked Elliot's pencil case and lobbed it across the yard. It wasn't even cruel, just typical playground nonsense. Elliot didn't shout, didn't whine. He walked calmly over, picked up the pencil case, dusted it off, then returned to Frankie. Without a word, he drove his forehead straight into Frankie's nose. No wind-up, no shove, just a brutal, calculated headbutt. Frankie went down screaming, blood streaming between his fingers. Elliot stood there motionless, almost serene. When the teachers yanked them apart and started scolding, Elliot spoke just once. He needed to learn cause and effect. He was suspended for a week. That should have been the moment alarms went off everywhere, but in a town like Grenon, strangeness was chalked up to eccentricity. The Prestwoods are private, people said back then. I can't stand that phrase now. By secondary school, Elliot had grown into a tall, gaunt figure. Not unhealthy, sharply built like he'd been carved rather than raised. He still rarely spoke, but when he did, his words cut deep. Once, in English, he told the teacher she had a twitch in her right eye whenever she lied. And she did. I saw it myself after he said it. Rumors began to swirl, that he hurt animals, that he was obsessed with the anatomy chapters in biology, that he never blinked in class. Teenage exaggerations maybe, but we all believed them because they fit. I was unlucky enough to sit beside him in maths one year. His notebooks were immaculate. Neat diagrams, underlined formulas, every page filled without a blemish. What struck me most was his handwriting. Every letter identical, uniform, as if printed by a machine. Sometimes he muttered under his breath. Not answers, not notes, just words. Once I caught a hammer. A hammer's best. The edge shatters, but it's harder to trace. I didn't ask what he meant. I just stopped borrowing his pens. By then, the Prestwood house had already turned into a subject of whispered conversation in town. The curtains always drawn, the yard too neat, the people inside like shadows that never really belonged. Lights in the Prestwood house flicked on and off at strange hours, sometimes in the middle of the night, like someone pacing from room to room. Neighbors whispered that they'd heard muffled screaming through the thin winter air, but the curtains were always drawn tight, the house sealed shut like a tomb. Then came what we all started calling the pantsless incident. It was the dead of winter, frost covering the schoolyard when Elliot climbed out of the car in full uniform, except for his trousers, just underwear and his blazer, his bare legs bone white against the icy air. He didn't run, didn't shiver, didn't look the slightest bit embarrassed. He just walked, calm as ever, across the yard while kids stared and whispered. One of the teachers rushed out, draped a blanket around him, and asked what happened. Elliot looked her dead in the eye and said, "Dad said shame teaches urgency." No social workers came. Not then. Not for a long time. But the story spread faster than anything else ever had. Parents whispered in queues at the shop. Teachers looked stricken, but life carried on. We all carried on, until something shifted. One Monday, Elliot showed up dressed like any normal boy. Hoodie, jeans, trainers, not a scrap of uniform, and for once he seemed almost relaxed. He even smiled, an actual smile, at our science teacher. I remember the way it made the whole class sit straighter, unsure if this was good or terrifying. A teacher pulled him aside. He didn't come back the rest of the day. By lunch the next afternoon, Elliot was in a brand new uniform, brand new shoes, even a new bag. We later found out the school had paid for it. From that day, he changed. He played football with us at break. Not well, but he tried. He cracked dry little jokes. He raised his hand in class and asked questions. We all thought maybe the school had finally stepped in. Maybe he wasn't trapped in that house anymore. For the first time, he seemed reachable. Human. Then, one Friday afternoon, he invited me and a few others to his place. "Got a new PlayStation," he said, "and snacks." He even smiled again. I said no. Everyone did. We mumbled excuses. Busy, can't tonight. And he just nodded. Didn't push it. Looking back, that moment claws at me, because now I know what waited inside that house when he asked. It was after a long May weekend that Elliot stopped showing up at school. Monday, nothing. Tuesday, still absent. By Friday, whispers chased through the halls. Saturday night, the siren started, screaming down Wexley Lane, red and blue bouncing off windows. My mom yanked the curtain aside and whispered, "Oh my God." 2 ambulances, 4 police cars. A white forensic van parked outside the Prestwood house. The news didn't come out right away. It couldn't, not officially, not with minors involved. But small towns are sieves. Everything leaks eventually. By the following week, the truth had oozed through the cracks. 2 bodies, Martin and Diane Prestwood. Blunt force trauma. Bones shattered. No forced entry. No struggle. Just death. Cold, precise death. Elliot vanished for 36 hours after they found the bodies. When they finally discovered him, he was curled in a drainage culvert beneath the motorway, wrapped in a stolen school gym blanket, fast asleep. He confessed immediately. Said he'd done it on Saturday morning. Said he wore gloves. Said he brought a change of clothes. Said it wasn't rage, not even anger. He waited until they were both asleep, then used a hammer he'd nicked from the school maintenance closet weeks before. He wore earplugs so he wouldn't hear the sound. He left them under their bed, his own parents' bed, for 2 days. Then he went back to school, played football, laughed, pretended. He even invited us over like it was an experiment, like he wanted to see if he could blend in, fake normal long enough to not be caught. Elliot was 13. 13. The law protected his name in the press, but Grenon didn't need newspapers to know. We all knew. You could hear it in the hushed voices at the post office, see it in the way grown men avoided each other's eyes, feel it in the silence that fell whenever kids asked questions no one wanted to answer. They sent him away. Juvenile psychiatric detention, people said. Some claimed he was being studied, like a specimen. Others swore he escaped once, and they had to move him somewhere even further. I never learned the truth. But I do know this. Elliot changed Grenon. We stopped calling people eccentric. We stopped saying private when we meant strange. We stopped pretending locked doors weren't necessary. And sometimes, late at night, I still replay that Friday when he invited us over. I wonder, if I'd said yes, what would I have walked into? What would I have smelled upstairs, seeping from behind a closed door? And most of all, what would Elliot have done with me there? Because sometimes I think killing his parents freed him, like he'd shed a sickness that had been rotting him from the inside. But what chills me most isn't that he did it. It's that it seemed to work. And if it worked once, what's to say he won't try again? Because you can take a boy out of a house of horrors, but you can't always take the horror out of the boy. should have listened to my gut. That's the first thing that flashes through my head every single time I replay that night. Every time I close my eyes and see him again in my dreams. Every time the wind rattles my window just the wrong way, and my stomach clenches because it feels like a reminder. That night wasn't some fun urban explorer story gone sideways. It wasn't spooky in a playful, Halloween sort of way. It wasn't exciting, and it sure as hell wasn't something I ever should have said yes to. I'm not even the type who does that kind of thing. I'm not a thrill seeker, not one of those horror junkies who hunts for scares. But my best friend Jay, he lived for it. Jay had that nothing can touch me attitude stamped into his bones. Tall, wiry, with that constant smirk that made it seem like he'd been through hell already and found it hilarious. We'd been tight since middle school, inseparable even when the years tried to pull us in different directions. But Jay never grew out of that phase where sneaking into creepy, abandoned buildings and snapping photos for social media clout was the highlight of his week. It was a Thursday evening in May. I remember because I'd just dragged myself home from a brutal double shift at the auto shop. All I wanted was to nuke some leftover pasta and pass out in front of whatever was on TV. That's when my phone buzzed with his text. Jay. Yo, you up? Found something sick. You ever heard of Ridgeview Asylum? I paused, staring at the screen before typing back. You mean the one outside Iron Hollow? Jay. Yeah, real place. Been boarded up 20+ years. I got the back way in. I groaned aloud. Iron Hollow was a dying town about 25 minutes outside our city, Weyburn, in western Pennsylvania. I'd driven past Ridgeview once during a storm, and even from the road it was nightmare fuel. A hulking gray stone building with boarded windows, ivy twisting up its sides like nature was choking it out of spite. And Jay knew damn well I hated anything involving asylums. I'd lost a cousin to suicide when I was 15. We hadn't been close, but the funeral was burned into me. The grief on his mom's face, the hushed rumors whispered by adults who thought teenagers didn't notice. Places where people had been locked away and forgotten weren't spooky to me. They were tragic. They were rotten with pain. But Jay could talk anyone into anything. 10 minutes later, headlights swept across my apartment window. He was parked outside in his crappy Ford Focus with the missing hubcap, grinning like an idiot. A cold Red Bull waited in the cup holder on my side. I should have told him no. I should have slammed the door and gone back to my pasta. But instead, I muttered, "Fine. Let's make it quick." The drive out was quiet except for the low hum of his radio and the crunch of gravel under the tires. The road to the asylum cut through a tunnel of trees, their branches curling high above like blackened fingers reaching for each other. Halfway down, Jay killed the headlights and let the car glide in silence until we reached the rusted chain stretched across the driveway. "Trust me," he said, smirking. "Nobody's been out here in years." Ridgeview loomed in front of us, enormous 3 stories of gloom, with a collapsed annex sagging off the left side and a busted fire escape that looked ready to crumble if you sneezed near it. We hopped the chain and headed toward the side entrance Jay had scoped out earlier that week during one of his drives. He'd been itching to explore it ever since. But as we approached, I froze. I glanced up, and I swear to God, someone was watching us from the 3rd-story window. "Hold up," I muttered, my voice low. Jay turned, eyebrows up. "What's wrong?" I pointed. "Top floor, far right. Someone's up there." He followed my gaze, and then we both saw it. A pale face pressed against the glass, still as stone, eyes locked on us. Jay exhaled, half laughing. "Okay, so that's either a squatter or the ghost of Ridgeview himself." I didn't smile, didn't even breathe. But Jay, being Jay, lifted his arm and waved. "Hey, you selling haunted vibes or meth?" The face vanished, stepped back into the shadows and was gone. "Bro, no," I said sharply, panic twisting in my chest. "That's a bad sign. We should bounce now." "It's just some creep hiding out," Jay said. His tone was casual, dismissive, like he'd seen this 100 times. "People come here all the time. We'll be in and out. Easy." Before I could argue, he shoved aside a sheet of loose metal hanging from the wall. A door once, now nothing but rust, and slipped inside. And against every screaming instinct clawing at me, I followed. The first thing that hit me was the smell. Old mildew, stale piss, rust. Layers of rot so thick it felt like time itself had been fermenting in there. The stink clung to my throat like damp cloth. Our flashlight swept across the walls, catching graffiti scrawled in shaky hands. Most of it was just dumb. "Hell is empty. I see you." A cartoon dick with bat wings. But then Jay read one out loud, his voice mocking. "I love it when they run." He chuckled. "Damn. Edgy much." I didn't laugh. The air was thick with mold, humid and sour, pressing in on us like invisible weight. We crunched over shattered glass, stepped across broken tiles, even past a crumbling gurney left in one hallway. Its wheels rusted and twisted like it had died there too. I stayed close behind Jay, turning my head every few seconds, paranoid something would be creeping up behind us. The deeper we went, the more the building felt wrong. Not haunted, not Hollywood scary, but off, like the walls remembered things, like the halls themselves were holding their breath. We found a stairwell and climbed to the second floor. Patient rooms, long corridors lined with identical doorways, each leading to a square cell with a rusted bed frame and paint peeling in flakes of sickly green. Jay kept muttering under his breath, snapping photos. "Man, this is gold. Look at the texture on that wall. Unreal." I barely heard him. I was listening. To the silence. The kind that feels heavy, like it's carrying something you don't want to know about. Then we both heard it. Footsteps. Above us. Heavy. Deliberate. Pacing. Then pausing. Jay froze, his camera half raised. I leaned close, whispering, "Still think it's just a squatter?" He didn't answer. His eyes flicked to the stairwell at the far end. "Let's just check the third floor. If it's sketchy, we bail, swear." I wanted to tell him no. I wanted to tell him I'd rather sit alone in the dark hallway than climb another step. But I couldn't leave him. Not in this place. The third floor hit us like a wall. The air was colder, dense, like breathing through syrup. It smelled wrong too. Copper, wet fur, something raw and metallic like old blood. Our lights swept the walls, not just graffiti, symbols, scratched and painted, layered over each other, pentagrams, crosses wired together from animal bones, a scrawl in something brown-red, too thick to be paint. One room had cages, actual cages, bolted to the floor. Jay's voice dropped low. "Okay, this is starting to feel real weird." "No shit," I hissed. We edged down the hall toward the window room, the one where we'd seen the face earlier. Jay lifted his light toward a door in the middle of the corridor. That's when we heard it. Whispers. Soft, steady, barely audible, but definitely real. Words we couldn't make out, threading through the cracks like smoke. "Go," I whispered sharply. Jay didn't move. Instead, he raised his phone and hit record. The whispers stopped, and something stepped out. Not a shadow, not some see-through ghost. A man, middle-aged, pale, tall, dressed in torn, blood-stained scrubs. His eyes weren't wild, worse than that. They were steady, sharp, focused. He saw us. His mouth curled into a smile. Then he lunged, sprinting straight at us with a scream that ripped the air like a banshee. Jay's voice cracked. "Run!" I bolted, heart exploding in my chest, stumbling down the stairs, debris clattering beneath my boots. I could hear Jay's feet pounding behind me. And then not. He was gone. I didn't stop. I didn't think. Halfway down the second-floor corridor, I spotted a shattered window. No bars, jagged glass framing open night. I didn't hesitate. I dove. Glass ripped through my hoodie and jeans, slicing skin as I crashed out. The ground slammed into me hard, knocking the wind out of my lungs. I rolled into weeds, ankle twisting, elbow burning raw. but adrenaline kept me up. I ran. I didn't stop until I collapsed behind a rusted tool shed across the overgrown courtyard. My breath came in choked gasps, bile rising in my throat. For a second, I almost puked. Then I remembered Jay. I fumbled for my phone, hands shaking, and texted, "Where are you? Did you make it out?" No reply. 3 minutes crawled past like hours. Then movement. Jay sprinting across the lawn, pale as a ghost, eyes wide with terror, and behind him, 2 figures. Not just the man in scrubs. Another, shorter, wearing a mask. Jay screamed, "Run!" I didn't wait. We tore across the field together, crashing through weeds, lungs burning. We didn't stop until we hit the railroad tracks. We dove into a ditch, mud splattering our clothes, dead leaves sticking to our skin. We lay there, pressed flat, gasping. I risked a glance back. The 2 men stood in the asylum doorway, statues in the dark, just watching. Then, without a word, they turned and slipped back inside. We didn't call the cops, didn't post the photos, deleted everything on the drive home. Later, Jay told me what happened after I jumped. He'd panicked, couldn't find the window, so he hid behind a pile of metal boxes near the elevator shaft. That's when he saw them. 2 men, the tall one and the short one, whispering. Then my text buzzed his phone. They heard it, turned. He ran. They followed. We never went back. Never talked about it again. But I think about it every night. Not just their faces, not just the chase, but the fact that someone was already there, waiting, watching us long before we ever set foot inside. And the question that keeps me awake, what if we'd stepped into that middle room? What if we'd stayed 5 minutes longer? What were they doing in that asylum? I'll never know, and I never want to.